Hey kids, how you doing? Sorry I couldn't be here with you today. I just wanted to take a few minutes here to go through the big ideas for our Great Depression chapter, which we are about to uh, enter as we finish off our study of the 1920s in Chicago, and we enter into the decade of the 1930s, which also coincided mostly with the time period that is known as the Great Depression. Um, Generally the 1920s, we didn't spend a great deal of time talking about the economic times during the 20s, little bits here and there, talked about labor conditions and things like that. But we really didn't emphasize the fact that the 20s, for a lot of people, not everybody, certainly not everybody, but for a lot of people, the 1920s were a time of prosperity. It was generally good times for people, at least economically. There were plenty of jobs to go around, and consumer goods became available on a wide basis for people. When we say consumer goods, we're talking about things like cars, talking about things like refrigerators, radios, things like that. In these days, TVs would count uh, as a consumer good. A computer would count as a consumer good. Certainly a cell phone would count as a consumer good. So the kind of stuff that you use and eventually you get rid of and you get another version of, that's a consumer good. That became very plentiful during the 1920s, and that was something that when we were talking about the 20s in Chicago, we didn't really touch on. But that is kind of one of the parts about the 1920s that was certainly prevalent and certainly out there for people. Well, in late 1929, the stock market crashed in New York, and there was uh, a a great deal of causes, and we're going to get into those with our first article and set of FBI notes that we're going to do. There were a bunch of causes for why that happened, so I won't really talk about them here. We'll get into those there, but it made uh, our entrance into the Great Depression. Uh, the economy collapsed, and it wasn't really caused by the stock market crash, but that was the beginning of it. And then that led to other things that occurred, and led to other things that occurred after that, and led to other things that occurred after that. And it caused this shrinkage of our economy where what it came down to was people lost their jobs. And uh, there was a period where uh, unemployment was 25%, 30% in America, and in some places it was much higher. There were, where around the area where we live here in Illinois, in the Chicago area, it was much higher than 25 or 30%. That was just the national average. Uh, so uh, as we entered the Great Depression and got into this period of really really tough times, that's where you see the title for the chapter, fear, because it was a scary time for Americans. You can see right there, that's a line for, it says free cup of coffee and donuts for the unemployed. And there's a good bet that most of the men that you see in that line there, they probably were not going to eat anything else that day. Uh, there wasn't, when people lost their jobs, you have to remember that at the time there was no unemployment insurance. Okay, there was no welfare. All right, if you lost your job, you were on your own, and you had to figure out how you were going to get by. And some people were able to better than others, depending on what kind of support system that you had. Uh, but it was a time of great suffering in American history, and really a time that America really had to kind of search for, okay, what are we, what is our country all about if we can't even keep our people healthy. We can't keep our people eating well. They want a job and there's no job to get out there and get. And that really became, kind of the story, and especially the first half of the 1930s. Things got a little bit better as the decade went on, and by the end of the 30s, we were starting to kind of ramp up, even though we still were struggling really until the early 1940s to get out of the depression itself. And by that time, we were in World War II. So suddenly there was a whole different kind of job that needed to get done. Uh, and it's also important to remember that the generation that you're looking at right there, that those guys, they lived through what we're going to be studying now, and then they lived through World War II after that, and a lot of them had lived through World War One before. So certainly a generation that put its work in, no doubt about it. So as we take a look at the uh, big ideas that we've got for our chapter, we're going to touch on these things as we go, and by now you kind of understand where we are as far as the big ideas. Everything that we read about kind of relates back to one of these big ideas, and sometimes it's obvious and other times it's not so obvious. So we're gonna take a look at that. Okay, our first one is it's a simple one, and it's one that gets in your gut, gets in your heart. What does it feel like to lose everything? We've lived through a time where it's been different. It's the circumstances are different than what America went through in the Great Depression, but we've seen people that through sickness, through loss of jobs, and uh, going back to 2008 when the economy collapsed and what has become known as the Great Recession. Uh, we've seen people that the fall into poverty, and we've seen the social and emotional and human toll that takes. You may get another job at some point, but especially if you're a child during those times, you change. You realize that things can get bad fast, and that they may not get better anytime soon. And by the time they do get better, you're changed forever. And that's a really hard, sad thing that a lot of Americans had to live with in the 1930s. And in our time, people are dealing with that. Maybe on a grand scale, people aren't dealing with it on the same level, but that loss of hope is a very a corrosive force in America. That when people feel like things are bad and they won't be getting better anytime soon, it's you end up very, very angry. You end up depressed. You end up despondent. And in the 1930s, it was the same thing that many of you have grown up with in your own lives to varying degrees. We're going to examine that and look at that. One of the movies that we're going to watch here during this chapter, I should say, the movie that we're going to watch during the chapter, really is that's kind of what it's all about. Is that you're gonna get a sense of what it's like when you want to do what's best for your family, and it just seems like there are no options out there. There are no opportunities to even, you're willing to do whatever you have to do, and no one will even give you the chance. And that's kind of where this particular idea is going. Now, we're going to learn about kind of where, what the United States government response was to the early days of the Great Depression under President Herbert Hoover. And then we're going to learn when we had the new election in 1932. So after, a good solid almost 3 years of the Depression, uh, with Franklin Roosevelt and his program, which was entitled the New Deal, to design to get America out of the Depression. That fundamentally changed what Americans felt like we should expect government to do to help people out in tough times. Because up until that time, there was a kind of a feeling like, government stays out of that business. They don't really handle, making sure that people have food and uh, shelter and clothing and all that kind of stuff. That's not government's job. That's the private sector's job. That's charity's job to do that kind of thing. And kind of what precipitated it was the just the sheer amount of suffering that people were going through was way more than what any charity could handle, what any, help from friends or family could handle. It was too big. Everybody was losing their their ability to make a living and have a job. So there, there was nobody who was better off than you were, or if they were better off than you were, they sure didn't have anything to spare to help you out. And so people began to look toward the government. It was the only institution big enough that could supply this sort of thing. Now that goes down. That's a debate that is still raging in our country almost 100 years later. We these days what we hear is it's the role of big government versus the role of small government, and what is the proper role of government, and it depends on what side of the issue that you're on as to what kind of the way you view it. Should that be a kind of an ongoing part of life, or was it just it was a one time thing? Hey, the Great Depression happened, and it was something that needed to be dealt with at the time. But then once that crisis is dealt with, we shrink things back down to where they were before. And what it really comes down to is it's money. If you're going to have programs like unemployment, if you're going to have programs like welfare to help people out when they're having a tough time, that costs money. And, that money comes from taxes. So are you willing to pay more in taxes so that you end up with kind of what's referred to as a safety net? So if things get bad enough, there's some help for you. Or would you prefer, you pay less in taxes, and then that's more of your money that you get to keep in your own pocket? And uh, that's just the debate that goes on in America, throughout American history, going back to this period of the Depression. It really went back before this, but here's where we really saw it swing from no, that's not government's job, to it better be government's job because absolutely nobody else can do that job. So we better get that done. So that's our second big idea, and one that it relates to present day very, very much. Now, kind of along the lines of uh, the Depression, it's really easy to get hung up on uh, the suffering of the whole thing, uh, and then talk about it. Okay, big government, small government, New Deal versus private enterprise, and all that kind of thing. Um, but one of the key themes to deal with in this chapter is just how strong people were. They got beaten down, people got hurt, and in some cases people changed forever, and that's not necessarily a good thing. But you know what? America kept going, and they kept fighting, trying to uh, fight their way out of poverty, fight their way out of heartbreak, fight their way out uh, of destitution, which is, I guess, another word for poverty. Um, and that was a mark that showed just how tough Americans can be when they have their backs against the wall. And America showed up when they needed to. And I don't think it's any coincidence that when this generation that lived through the Great Depression. You know, they lived through all that stuff that I've talked about. Well, right after that, they had to go fight Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, and evil was walking the earth, and they losing that war was not an option. So it's no coincidence that it was that generation that got that job done, and that'll be when we get into World War II. You know, we'll touch on that quite a bit. It's just that idea that that you know you keep going. Americans will keep going when the times get tough, and they will do their best to find a way to get through things. And they may whine and complain, they may gripe. We've certainly seen enough of that. It seems like people do more of that than ever, but that's more of a social media thing. I think people always did. They just didn't have time to put it on social media, so it stays there forever. Uh, but people find a way, and you know, it's not just Americans who do, but that's who we're concentrating on here in this chapter. So yeah, we'll be getting into it. That quote, "Everyone loses a couple, but you either pack up and you go home or you keep fighting," is from a different movie that I'm kind of hoping I'm going to get to show you, but it'll depend on how much time we have to get the chapter in between now and winter break. So maybe we get to see that movie, maybe we don't. It would be nice if we could, but you'll get the opportunity for at least one movie here, and it's one that I think you will like a lot. So we'll get into the Great Depression, and we will learn about the decade of the 1930s as we approach winter break, and then this will be our new chapter, and hope you enjoy learning about it. All right, okay. I will see you guys later on. All right, bye bye.